Videodrome! Long live the new flesh!
Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack.
You know who I can do without? I can do without the people in the video store.
Which ones?
All of them. They never rent quality flicks. They always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
And now, on with the show.
Death to Videodrome. Long live the new flesh. All right, fine. We're going to do this the scanner's way, and I'm going to fry your fucking brain. That's right, guys. We are back on Cronenberg month. It is I, Scanner, Mike, the Birdman, but I'm not alone with my fellow scanners or perhaps viewers of Videodrome. Or maybe
Alex.
Alex, or maybe our wives are at the Mantle Clinic. Much to we got a lot to talk about today, folks.
And I'm Aaron Pollyea.
Yes, Michael.
Hi.
Maybe when you're introducing us, actually introduce us. So
No, I was hoping you guys would jump in.
Where? See, this is what happens when we don't have the ability to scan each other's brains.
Yes, this is true. Plus, normally I would point at you, but this isn't a video podcast; it's audio.
Yes, and if we focus hard enough, we can connect through the nervous system of the computers and scan each other that way, I guess.
That's true. So yes, as Alex has alluded to, and if you've been listening to the show over the last little while, we are talking about Canadian director, artist, auteur, strange guy, David Cronenberg. That's right. Last week we took a look at his work through the 1970s, through the body horror kind of thing he more or less started. We looked at Shivers, Rabid, Fast Company, which was definitely not a body horror movie. And what was the last one we looked at?
The Brood.
The Brood, yeah. So this week we're going to look at David Cronenberg's 1980s, as Alex called it, his blockbuster aspirations. And this is the decade where I liked almost everything I saw.
Wow.
Yeah, this was really good. Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff we're going to talk about. I should kind of preface things though by saying we're not going to talk so much about The Fly and The Dead Zone, simply because those movies have been talked about to death. They are movies that everybody likely has seen. It's also October, and one is one of Christopher Walken's most best performances he's ever given. And The Fly put Jeff Goldblum arguably on the map and is considered to be one of the best remakes of all time. What more can we say other than both are fantastic?
And those are, if you've seen Cronenberg films and you know the name, but you don't know, you're not a big horror fan, those are the two that did hit the mainstream for the longest time. Like that's what he was associated with the vast majority of film fans out there. I know that for a long, and we may as well get those two out of the way. They're his mid-80s movies. Very quickly, that The Dead Zone, I believe for the longest time, was Stephen King actually liked it. Notoriously, Stephen King seems to hate all of the adaptations of his films, and then when he makes his own adaptations, they end up being terrible, but he thinks they're good. But surprisingly, The Dead Zone was one of the few that he thought was actually a well-done adaptation, and it was in that string of films from like the late 70s into the early to mid 80s where there were a lot of decent adaptations, a lot of times even improving upon the books themselves. Like you've got Carrie, I think, started it off, and then you had The Shining with Kubrick, and then right around this time you had the 1-2 punch of The Dead Zone and Christine. So the Dead Zone, you probably are familiar with it, even if you haven't seen the movie, because there was a TV show that ran for 6 years, where basic premise, man who was prone to getting headaches now and then gets into a car crash, goes into a coma, his brain rewires itself, and he now has the ability, when he touches somebody, to see their past and future. And he both helps people with things in the past. He also helps solve a serial killer murder spree. And then he touches a candidate who's running for Senate and sees the future where he's the president, and he launches all-out nuclear war, basically destroying the planet. And it's his mission to prevent it from happening. So that's The Dead Zone. Good movie. Again,
Yeah.
not overly Cronenbergian, except maybe in the visual style of just the way he cuts things and the way the audio is. It's more of a straight up thriller. Probably the first time where he had what we would say to be like AAA actors in his films.
Yeah, because there was Christopher Walken, Martin Sheen,
Tom Skerritt, which for the time, like this is shortly after Apocalypse Now. This is right after, or a couple years after Deer Hunter. Like this is when they're at the peak after Alien. Like these are well-known people. So, great movie, worth watching. Again, if you haven't seen Cronenberg's other films, you've probably seen or heard of it. And The Fly, I actually surprisingly watched for the very first time ever.
Is it not fucking awesome?
Well, what's crazy to me is that I hadn't seen it. Like I'd seen like bits and pieces. This is a film that like my parents had seen many times, and I remember them like as a kid them telling me, "Yeah, it's pretty gross," and Aaron telling me it's pretty gross. Yeah, it's pretty gross.
Yeah, it's, to me, I don't like it because I like the original Fly. Since I'm kind of the 1950s and 60s, sci-fi movie guy. And there are remakes that come from 1950s and 60s B movies, like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, which I actually really like and arguably is even more gross than The Fly. But for whatever reason, The Fly just turns me off. I don't like the movie. It's weird. I
think even though The Thing is in a cold climate, I feel like Cronenberg filmed this more cold. Like it's a lot of close-ups. It might be because in the thing looks very alien. And like every part of it's so beyond something that could happen on the Earth. Maybe it's because bugs are gross, and the way it becomes the Brundlefly, is it maybe because you still see the humanity in the character even as he's morphing into something hideous?
I don't know. I think I honestly don't know. I just don't like the remake. I mean, the original I really like, but this remake, it might be that there's some humanity in it, that it's too gooey at times. What can I say? I don't know. I can't really put it in clear words why I don't like it, but I've seen it like 2 or 3 times, and if I never see it again, I won't be upset about it.
You know what? Watching it, I'm like, this is cool. I'm almost in agreement in that the grossness doesn't really bother me that much. To me, it's a serviceable film. It's his most famous film, which is surprising, but that's probably because it hit at the right cultural time. Like it became sort of a phenomenon at the time when it first came out. They're like, oh my god, this is, it was held up sort of as, this is, the 80s hyper gross horror film remake. This was sort of the epitome of that. I mean, I think a year or two later we ended up with The Blob, which is
1988.
Arguably even more gross in some scenes.
Again, and it's another remake that I don't really like. I like the original far better.
The Devil. I love the Blob remake.
Well, The Thing, The Thing is my favorite horror film. So I like the gross, but you know what? I can see all the gross things all I want, and the morphing of the body and tearing apart, and I can see that and go, okay, that's a technical marvel, that's cool. But you know what? I think it's the realism in The Thing. Whenever somebody gets torn apart or ripped or mutates, it's so otherworldly that it almost transcends being like grotesque and like oh my god, I can't watch that. Whereas in The Fly, the hardest scene to watch for me is not even the morphing and the grossness. It's the arm wrestling scene where he breaks the guy's wrist and the bone sticks through.
Yeah.
It's because it's so realistic looking. And I feel like maybe that's what it is. It's his body horror was more grounded in reality, as even though it looks, I mean, it's obviously science fiction and ridiculous, but maybe because the transformation, like you see his flesh like change scene by scene, and then like out of his own body you see his face melt away, things like that, you're like, whereas in The Thing it's so otherworldly. like probably the most disturbing thing in that entire movie is
The dog
the
sequence
dogs.
for me.
Yeah, because they look real. Whereas like when the head pulls itself off the body and grows legs and walks away, that's so otherworldly it can't happen. You're like, oh my god, that's gross. But your brain doesn't go into the meld of like, oh my god, that could happen.
Well, I mean,
So-
I don't think anything with the Fly really could happen.
No, but you know what I
At
mean? Like
all.
it seems more grounded in like what you picture could happen.
Your
even though
mind allows it to complete the set, and basically, it's your mind's autocomplete. When we look at someone snapping a bone,
See,
we know that's possible.
I don't know. Like I have a really, and I'm sorry if we're talking about the Fly too much.
Oh no,
but,
it's all good.
My general opinion of the Fly is my suspension of disbelief is completely broken right in the beginning. It isn't really that grounded. It just seems ludicrous. And well, I mean, with the original, it's the same way, but it's black and white, and there's that level of disconnection anyway.
So question: if let's say one of us, if we took the film and we made it black and white, could you watch it?
No,
Okay.
because it's still ridiculous. I mean, I think that it's far too over the top for the premise. It's not really a science fiction film, and it's not really supposed to be a body horror film. Even the original, it's more of like this mystery thriller that has like a science fiction-y premise, and played off like that, it's really good. And there's that kind of like horrific ending of the original where the woman kind of hears her, the guy's voice screaming, help me, and
Yeah.
it's the fly caught in the web, and that's horrific. But it's not like it's over the top body horror. It's just like a regular horror film, where this is where Cronenberg's version of it is just ludicrous, and I get nothing except disgust out of it.
That might have been the point. Like we don't know. Like I haven't seen enough on the film, but do you think this is one where it could be like Body Snatchers, where maybe it's time to do another remake?
Nah,
And maybe don't quite go in that much of a, like, maybe keep some of the aspect of the mutation, but not gross for the sake of being gross, and maybe go a little more philosophical into it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe because I mean, there are very few remakes from 50s and 60s science fiction that really do work, in my opinion. Like
70s Body Snatchers is good.
the 1970s Body Snatchers with like Leonard Nimoy in it, fantastic, because it's really unsettling. It's a really good thriller.
Yeah, but then again, the 90s one with Gabriel Anwar, not good.
No, not good at all. Like I said, I liked the Thing remake, John Carpenter's The Thing. It's a very different movie than the original, which helps. Fantastic remake. And then you go on to the other side of the scale, which I don't like, The Fly, and the other one I really don't like is Keanu Reeves in The Day the Earth Stood Still. They completely shifted the narrative of the entire film into this like post-apocalyptic pornography.
But Tom Cruise's War of the Worlds is decent.
Oh, that wasn't that good either. But
comparatively,
it was much better than the Day the Earth Stood Still remake.
Yeah, and you could go. There are other films that have been remade in that, like the Invisible Man has been done many times, and it's worked out to different varying degrees. The most recent one being an interesting interpretation, but
I thought that one was really, really good and unexpectedly good.
So it's worth, if you could switch it on its head a little bit and change it. But yeah, like The Fly, I think was his biggest success in Hollywood until about 10 years ago. So it's interesting that but even at the time, I was reading some of the reviews just now. It was very polarizing. It was sort of, it got some similar. It got more praise than The Thing did at the time. Interestingly enough, The Thing has become one of the biggest cult classics of all time, whereas The Fly almost seems like it was a bigger hit in the 80s than it is now. It's sort of like, about it because of Jeff Goldblum, but you don't. It's not something that comes to mind when people are like, "What are the greatest horror movies of the '80s?"
Yeah, I agree.
So with those two mainstream ones out of the way, let's go to, The Brood ended in 1978 or 79, And then the next feature film we have from David Cronenberg is the cult classic Scanners. Now, before we talk about Scanners, it is the movie he's had that technically had the longest legs, in that about 10 years later, we ended up getting a double pack of direct-to-video, when direct-to-video was a big deal, sequels about the next generation of Scanners in Scanners 2 and Scanners 3, and followed again by 2 other films, Scanner Cop and Scanner Cop 2. So it spawned an unlikely franchise, most notable of which the sequel Scanner films 2 and 3 having some people that ended up going off to make and star in the Stargate franchises. So it was filmed in BC. And Scanners probably being the one Cronenberg film that had the most pop culture references, even before everybody on the internet, because of YouTube, saw the scene over and over and over again of the dude's head blowing up. We would hear references to it in other films, especially things that were created by other Canadians. So yeah. I would think that the reference that's probably used the most, that most people like, it flew over their heads at the time, and unless you were either a big horror fan in the States or were a Canadian film fan, because it's one of those movies that kept repeating over and over again on City TV and a few other channels, was in Wayne's World.
There's the Wayne's World thing.
The Wayne's World scene where Garth is left by himself when Wayne quits, and he's sitting there, and the guy turns to the other guy at the comptroller. He's like, "You ever see that scene in Scanners when the dude's head blew up?" And then it cuts to the screen showing Garth, and he's shaking and looking
I never even put that together till right now.
Yeah, and there's another reference to it in a movie that I ended up watching a ton of, and it's a pretty problematic movie now. But if you remember the movie Leonard Part 7 with Bill Cosby,
yeah,
there's one of the villains' head explodes after eating a hot dog because he's a vegetarian. And I remember seeing that movie so often on like Cinemax or whatever, but yeah, that was a direct reference.
Yeah, like it became sort of notorious, and I think, behind the scenes, the scene was one of the most simple things as far as effects go. They couldn't get union workers to do the stunt, so David Cronenberg filled up a dummy's head with food coloring and dog food, and then used a double-barreled shotgun and blew it up from below a table.
Right, good for him.
So it's like that's the interesting, is like how simple some of these effects can be. And I mean, does it look hokey now? Yeah, but in 1981, I don't think anybody had seen anything like that.
You know what? I would argue it's probably some of the best visual effects, because it is so gooey, and because of the 1980s, like you're getting people like Tom Savini, you're getting people who worked on I think his name was John Beekler. Either way, the guy who did the special effects for American Werewolf in London, and Greg Nicotero, who would train under Savini on Day of the Dead. So you're getting all these wonderful practical effects, and yet Cronenberg's like, okay, give me a good head cast, go down to the local AMP, because this was filmed in Canada, give me some dog food, and as you mentioned, some food coloring, and it looks great. That effect still holds up today.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think it looks amazing. I think it's top notch,
like,
even now.
Literally a shotgun and a balloon full of food.
Yeah,
and it was a simple enough effect. And the hardest part of filming it was having Michael Ironside sitting in the room, because they weren't sure if he should be sitting directly next to him, and the danger was, what kind of spread are we going to get on the buckshot? So I guess we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. The actual movie itself is a what if scenario. It's what was that drug that they gave all the women for thalidomide? Yeah,
in the real 1950s.
Yeah, and that was a big scare. Cronenberg being a baby of the 40s, but like my mom was telling me, like when she was born, that was a thing that was still being done in early to mid 50s, where a tranquilizer to help women when they get rid of morning sickness and cramps, and also when they're giving birth for pain and everything, and it ended up giving babies horrible deformities, and it's pretty horrific stuff. And I don't think the drug company really ever was held as accountable as they should have been.
That's
Um,
that's even mentioned in the song. We didn't start the fire, children of thalidomide, as one of the things that's just it's in the lyrics. Anyway,
yeah, like it you can
it's
look it up.
horrific.
I would suggest not looking at pictures if you're sensitive to it, because it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
One of the biggest blunders of modern medicine. So the concept, and again, think about it: babies born with deformities, Cronenberg's whole fascination with the mutagenic properties of humans, and yada yada yada. So it's what if that drug secretly, instead of that, the drug secretly gave kids, they were addicted to it first of all when they're born. So it's almost like the crack baby epidemic, but instead it's more like, what if they gave them weird psychic powers where they could use telekinesis to control other people's nervous systems and blow things up or read people's minds or control them. And there's this agency that wants to control it, and there's a whole generation of these kids that are going to go around and excuse me, it was all invented by this doctor played by Patrick McGowan, who if you're a classic spy / science fiction fan, you'd know from The Prisoner, the British TV show, and he was also in Secret Agent, or one of those other shows that was supposed to be like a James Bond ripoff from the 60s. But probably most famous from The Prisoner. That's the show. I don't know if you've seen it, Michael, where you've seen spoofs of it for sure, where this secret spy is kidnapped, brought to an island, and he wants to leave, and everybody there is given a number instead of a name. But if you try to leave the island, these giant like bubbles come and take you back to the island. Like,
okay.
You've probably seen the Simpsons spoof of it more than anything. I grew up watching it because my parents like taped it on VHS and they'd watch it nonstop.
Yeah, I watched it on PBS growing up too.
So it very cool concept. Very, very British and weird. If you've seen Zardoz, it's like Zardoz without the sex. So he's in that as you've got Michael Ironside. Drawn a blank on the main actor's name, but he wasn't really famous for much of anything else. But Jennifer O'Neill is in it as the no, is she in that, or is she in? I'm drawing a blank. Wait a minute. She is not in that. She's in Videodrome, I think. I'm confusing the two together. Sorry. But the basic plot is homeless man who has psychic powers is being pursued by both a private medical agency that has plans for potential world domination, but it's never really explained exactly if they're going to do that or not, and being pursued by Michael Ironside, who is a renegade psychic criminal warrior. And
yeah, I mean, basically, one way to explain it is this guy, Cameron Vale, is the homeless guy. He's been put out, cast out on the street, and like as Alex said, he was picked up by this organization. They're like, hey, we're looking to stop Michael Ironside's group of scanners. We'll help you train your abilities, because he's like, you hear voices all the time, right? And you can't turn them off. He's like, yeah. He's like, well, what do you hear right now? And this Dr. Ruth, I think his name is, brings him to this clinic, and he's like, I don't hear anything. I'm like, that's because I've given you this drug named ephemeral, which suppresses scanner abilities. You help us, we'll help you. And there's a really cool scene, and I never really even thought about it like this. They find this guy who is a yoga master, and in the world of parapsychology and the supernatural, yoga masters do demonstrate some abilities that could potentially be considered superhuman or parahuman, I guess. Like the ability to control their alpha waves, to control their heart rate, to control basically certain functions that can't be controlled. They can do it.
So you're talking about the guy that looks like Lenin.
Yeah, and he's just
Yogi Lenin.
Yeah, so he's sitting on the floor, and when Cameron comes in and Dr. Ruth says, hey, this is kind of like our psychic obstacle course. This is your sparring partner today. And Dr. Ruth says, I want you to speed up his heart rate, but don't kill him. He'll be able to help himself, but if he doesn't, we've got things in the way for you to help him and help you. So Cameron goes a little too far, doesn't kill him, but hurts him. And he looks at Dr. Ruth at one point and says, you know what? That really was easy. So they send him out into the field to find Ironside. Shenanigans ensue. And it's honestly a pretty cool movie. I really enjoyed this one. Although, Aaron, do you not agree this is the movie of the spaz shotgun?
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of fun gun stuff in here, but I'll get to that really quick. I actually also loved this movie. I thought it was slower than a lot of his films, but I loved it. And yes, there is crazy gun stuff in this. The psychic agency, the agency that's like
Consec, I think it is.
Yeah, Consec. Like they always have these Walther P-38s from World War II.
Yeah, it was so weird.
It's one of the few pistols I own from the war, and it's a German gun. And I kept trying to pause the movie so I could see if I could get like a serial number off of it, because there's a couple close-up shots of this Walther, and I could not do it. I took a picture of the Walther that I own and sent it out, but to you guys. But yeah, the shotguns in this are weird. I haven't seen them in a lot of movies. I mean, spazzes are spazzes. They're everywhere, right? But they have like these long folding stocks that were kind of cool in this. And then obviously the Walther is just, it tickled me, I guess, seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is probably, because I've been watching these in batches of 3, and I typically watch them after I have a long day of reviewing a video game or a bunch of other things that I have to do. I use these movies to unwind. By the way, don't recommend.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
What you're saying, Michael, is don't watch this at 1 a.m.
Okay. Quick sidebar. I made the horrible mistake of having a bunch of edibles, watching Scanners and Videodrome back to back.
Oh, dude, I'm so sorry.
Let me fucking tell you.
Just be glad you weren't watching Naked Lunch, and we won't be watching it.
I was like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? It was interesting.
Scanner. Yeah, we should say that the early part in the movie, we introduced by Michael Ironside, where he's pretending to be a random employee at this company who's doing a conference, I guess a corporate conference with somebody who says they have scanner powers and trying to display what they are. And he ends up becoming a test subject, pretending that he's going to get scanned, but in reality, he reverses the scan and blows the dude up. And that's the scene that is the movie's famous for. The actor that gets blown up, the little bald dude with a mustache, I'm forgetting his name, but he was famous at the time in Canada. He was a TV personality, and he ended up having a TV show that ran for 6 or 8 years called Seeing Things. And it was about a dude that could see the future, and he tried to stop bad things from happening. It was sort of a comedy drama. And so he was known here. He was actually more well known than Ironside at the time. And this was the movie that launched Ironside into the mainstream. That's probably the most important thing of this film, is that Ironside became a leading guy after this.
Yeah, and honestly, he's such a good villain, but he's not, like, in his last little bits where he's talking to Cameron when there's the final confrontation and a bunch of revelations come to light, he almost makes sense for about 30 seconds, and then he says some pretty crazy shit.
When they do the flashbacks to 15 years earlier, or almost 20 years earlier in the 60s, where it's the black and white television footage, and they gave him hair, which is hilarious.
Yeah, it was weird.
Hair. And when he's talking, you're like, oh man, this man was tortured. They're like, what'd you do? You drilled a hole into your head to get the voices out? And he's like, yeah. And then he drew a third eye on his bandage.
But it's supposed to be a door.
And my wife had come in and into the room when they were showing that. She was like, why is there a third eye on his head on this bandage? Well, he drilled a hole in his head. And she goes, so he pulled an Egon?
Yes.
And I go,
and it would have worked.
And it would have worked if they hadn't stopped him.
Yeah.
Which
I
was pretty
wonder
funny.
if that's a reference in Ghostbusters.
Because Dan Aykroyd and
The timeline would work out.
that I believe Scanners was produced by Reitman. Let me see here, because I saw his name pop up in the credits for it. Pretty much everybody in Mark Irwin with cinematography. Pretty much everybody in Toronto-based filmmaking and Canadian filmmaking knew each other back then. So it would not surprise me if, in some way, at the very least, that Aykroyd was a big fan. The idea of psychokinetic powers, like the entire TV show Sci Factor was sort of based around that was Aykroyd's baby, right? So it would not surprise me if that was somewhat a reference.
My only gripe with, well, I have two gripes with this movie, and I'm sorry. Otherwise, I love it.
Yeah.
It's that the first part of it is very slow.
Oh god,
Yeah.
And then the psychic powers the scanners have are kind of all over the place. It's whatever they need to do for that scene. It doesn't.
They're more in common with Dungeons and Dragons psionics than true telepathy and telekinesis.
Well,
because I mean, they have like pyrokinesis at times when they need to. Like people just burst into flames.
There is one ability, and Alex kind of talked about it in a joking way at the opening of the show, where he scans into the phone line. Now, in some of the role-playing games that I've played before in the past, specifically Shadowrun deals with there's a type of Decker called an otaku, and an otaku can talk to computers like a Decker would. Basically, they would plug in their data jack into their head and they could hack the net like we've seen in countless cyberpunk things. But an otaku can do it without hardware. They can just intuitively know a computer system inside and out, and they can hack it kind of that way. And when I was watching Scanners, I was thinking, that's an ability I wonder if anybody's talked about before this movie, because that idea in 1981 must have seemed so radical.
See, I think it's an interesting one because in my mind, that our main character, he can basically read minds. He's very, very good at reading minds. And him expressing that ability suggests that computers are at least similar to neural networks, even old school computers in a way. Like he can talk to it as long as he can get close to it. So if he calls it up, he can like listen over the phone line or whatever. And it was kind of cool.
It was still a primitive understanding of, remember, 1981, how many people knew how a computer worked to begin with, right? So the idea that Cronenberg's got the doctor to tell him, a computer has a nervous system. It's just made out of different parts.
There was something that. Sorry, Alex.
What I was going to say, for anybody that's an old tech nerd, I loved looking at the computer motherboards and seeing how the trace lines were like a quarter of an inch wide. Now they're like, you have to use a magnifying glass, and it looks like a fraction width of a hair. But like, you could look at those old 1970s motherboards and go, I know exactly what everything does without even reading it, because you could just see where everything connected to what.
There's something that's said, and I think it's Dr. Ruth that says it to Cameron, and he's talking about the ability to hack in the computers more or less, and he says something along the lines of, and I'm definitely paraphrasing here, a nervous system, a computer is just a different type of nervous system, but connecting to another's nervous system is easy. The only thing that separates you is distance. When he talks about scanning through. I was like, that's really kind of an interesting idea from a philosophical standpoint.
And he scans into the computer system at Consec and starts to change their computer software by essentially using his brain to send the binary code through the phone lines. And it's mentioned how it can happen, because again, most people in 1981 would have no idea how that even worked, by the scientists at the building saying, oh yeah, we're connected to the phone line so people can connect to us remotely. And that would have been, at the time, even a concept where they're like, what? Because, only big universities and like large scientific data centers would have even had connectivity like that, right? So that was still a new concept, and it, dare I say, it predates war games, right? So is it one of the first times we've seen hacking in a movie?
Probably, I would say.
For hacking from an outside source?
No, I know of a movie that's far in advance of this.
Okay.
And it's GOG, and I've reviewed it for Earth versus Soup.
Okay, so it might have been. It's probably the first time that I think I saw anything.
And believe it or not, GOG is from 1954.
Holy shit.
The idea of using a telephone line to freak into it.
It's actually using radio to interfere with the system.
Okay.
And reprogram it from a distance.
Okay, I can see that. That's cool. And it does include a cool scene here where, while he's hacking it, obviously he uses it to blow up the computers, and it melts the phone.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice touch.
It created so much heat by overclocking that he overclocked the computers till they blew up, and then that heated up the copper wiring so much in the phone that it melted the phone. And then we have the big showdown, which is a fight. On paper, you're like, how is this going to be interesting? It's just two people staring at each other while the music goes. And how they did that was having some of the most bizarre and amazing skin effects I've ever seen. Where they start giving
intense.
You slowly see their veins pulsate like as if you're a bodybuilder, and then they give each other hematomas that get so large in real time. We're not talking stop motion. We're talking in real time. They're pumping it full, so it gets so big that, and then you see like the veins bursting, and then you see eyes popping and screaming, and they set each other on fire, and then we get a body swap. So,
yeah, that's weird.
Yeah,
weird.
I thought that was. I did not see that coming.
He scanned him so hard that he literally did suck his brain out and replaced it with his own.
Yeah, but his original body was burnt up from the energy of the fight anyway, so it was kind of a survival mechanism. Okay, cool.
He was so hurt that he stopped focusing on defending his body.
Yeah,
and used all of his power to replace Ironside's brain with his own. He basically did a full neural net transplant into his body, and the only way you can tell is somehow that changes the color of his irises.
Yes,
and it's his voice too.
Well, it's a mixture. They did something with a synthesizer to make it sound like it's a bit of both. But yeah, and I guess the explanation is the eyes are the window to the soul. Is that how it's supposed to sort of be explained? Which I guess will tie into our next film. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's more infamous for that one scene than anything else. Most people, if they've heard of Scanners, they know, well, that's the movie where his head blew up, but they know nothing else about it. It's good, but it's an hour and like 30 minutes long. The first 40 are kind of rough outside of the head blowing up scene, as far as like he's a pacing wise.
Yeah, just slow. It's slow, but it's still a great movie.
Like if
I'd argue it's his best.
If they had taken this and then shortened it down to a 70-minute double feature drive-in, it would have done, I think, better.
Okay.
It's just a little, even for me, it's a little much with how slow it is. Like, it's even slower than The Brood.
See, I don't know. I didn't mind it, but for some reason, it sucked me right in. I was like, this is really good. Well,
I knew it was up your alley because of the style of movie that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Videodrome, I know,
starts off a little rough.
It's not one that Aaron likes, but this is the Cronenberg film as far as what it was. The first film he made that was added to the Criterion Collection. I know it's considered very culturally significant to Canadian cinema.
Well, it's so culturally relevant now.
I do have positive things I can say about it.
Okay. So I'll give the basic premise here. Very, very, very dumbed down level. The main character, played by James Woods, is a television broadcast station producer / vice president of programming, and he puts on edgy content to try to get the viewers in a world where television landscape is expanding. And through misadventure, it starts to warp his sense of reality, and crazy shit happens. So that's at the boiling it down to the simplest level. It is actually very much Cronenberg's reaction to what was in the news at the time, and the character is based on Moses Znaimer, the head of Chum City at the time, which, like, Michael, you remember how big City TV's influence was on Canadian.
Oh yeah, like it
in the
was
80s and 90s.
Oh yeah, especially because like City TV for me, kind of growing up, was a channel you could get over the air, but it was more of a kind of cable thing. But the thing is, they were so integrated into the Toronto media landscape. They're like, places like this gave rise to Much Music, which arguably shaped a lot of Canadian musical taste. But you also look at how they approached the news, and when we had CP24 and all the different reporters, hosts, and personalities, it really gave Canadian journalism an alternative to your Globals, to your CTV, to your CBC. And I'd say arguably the CP24 newsroom is better in terms of immediacy, I think. Well, but you remember voices like Mark Daly, for example.
Yeah, well, I'll give, because the vast majority of our listeners are going to be in the States. The Canadian television landscape prior to 1972, 73 was very British, very sanitized. It was when you picture, like, what's the boring Canadian, that is kind of what you pictured our television as. And you can really trace the change and dynamic to Canada coming into its own identity with the rise of City TV, and specifically Moses Znaimer's influence on it. He was born in the Soviet Union, escaped in when he was a kid, where was it? I think it was Toronto, and now he's the head of Zoomer Media. But he was probably the most pivotal person in Canadian television and radio ever for how he challenged things. I know he started at the CBC in the 60s as a on-screen talent, hosting different talk shows and that sort of a counterculture kind of guy. But it was when he made the move in 1972 to City TV, which was at the time like a local, like Toronto's a big market, so you'd had a bunch of different television stations, and it was a station that was pretty much focused just on the city. It wasn't really provincial-wide or Canada-wide, and he changed the station's programming format so dramatically that it became it was like it joined and became like ABC or CBS. It became like a nationwide channel, and again, like Michael said, through cable for up north, but eventually it got to the point where most people could pick it up with bunny ears across Ontario, and they had a rebroadcaster in Vancouver, I think, as well. And what he did was he took it from being a stiff, boring channel and boring Canadian content to the newsroom. One of the first things he did was he switched it so that people weren't at a news desk. They told the news wherever they were. So they would be in the back of the production truck, and they'd be doing the newscast from the production truck, or their desk in the office, and they wore T-shirts and they wore jeans, and they didn't have to wear a suit. And he was very big on multiculturalism. Prior to him, pretty much every single broadcaster in Canada was an old white guy. So what did he do? He brought in women. He brought in black people. He brought in Muslims, anybody, Jewish people, anybody. And it was his idea was that the news should be a reflection of the people in the city. So
well, sounds like a good guy.
Oh yeah, like and he got pushback for that, and like the relaxed nature. Like they would tell the news sitting on their desk, like not at a chair, sitting on their desk in the hall, or they'd be outside drinking a coffee and telling the news.
Yeah, like I remember Mark Daly, and I know I just mentioned that name. So for you, American listeners, go to YouTube, type in Mark Daly CTV News. He had this, or not CTV, City TV, and he had this very booming, deep, iconic voice, and he'd be like, City TV everywhere. But he would also give these really intense newscasts, but he could also goof around and be a complete nutty and funny guy, because there's something in Canada that he used to do, and Alex and I have talked about this a few times on Twig, where we mention City TV's Baby Blue movies, and you would just get these weird line deliveries.
Well, the big deal was in the 70s, after the news changed for them and they changed some of the programming, he started becoming the head of programming there, and he started getting edgier programs, and they would show movies that were uncut, which was unheard of at the time.
Yep.
They'd have swearing, like it would be like 8 p.m. and you'd hear the word fuck and you're like, what? And they would get fined $50,000 or whatever the CRTC would fine them. And his response was, that's okay, we got more viewers anyway. Like, his idea was, well, the ads will outweigh the fees that we pay, and also push for less censorship in television. And then in the late 70s, he brought out the Baby Blue programming block, which was softcore and sometimes hardcore pornos, and they would show them on broadcast TV that you could pick up with your bunny ears. And his argument was, well, they're doing that in Europe. Why are we so prudes? And it became sort of a hit, especially amongst teenagers, obviously, at the time. And it became the hip channel to watch. It was the channel that the youth of Canada would watch. And they parlayed that into the Great Movies programming, which was one of the first movie blocks that would show films completely uncensored. It was rated R. It was rated R. They showed it during, I think, 8 p.m. and then there would be another movie at 11 sometimes. But in that, with that Mark Daly guy, he was also the guy that would do like the little in-betweens, the little interstitials where he would announce what's coming next on the channel. And if it was a movie that was stupid or ridiculous, he'd make fun of the movie that was about to be shown on their network before it came on. And that was, again, unheard of, and like, why would you do that? And so they would do that. They also did things where they would go out into the public, and in between shows, if they were strapped for time for about 10 seconds between having a commercial on, they would just have people out in the streets filming things going on in town, and they would comment on it and make little jokes and quips about it. And then roll around, he starts launching these other channels when cable became big. One of the ones that he did was he pitched in the States, actually, the idea of a 24-hour music station in the early 70s. And he was laughed out of the room. And lo and behold, some of the people he pitched it to ended up creating MTV. And he then ended up suing them for the idea, because some of the programming and the marketing for it was pretty much identical to the idea he pitched. Got some money out of it, and eventually went and took I think it was the new music programming and a couple other programs that they were doing on City TV, and used that as the launching platform for Much Music in Canada. So it came out technically a couple of years after MTV did, simply because it took longer to get the money together. And then from there ended up programming probably 6 to 12 other cable specialty channels, and became sort of a media empire in the 80s and 90s. Eventually bringing back Baby Blue and some other programming in the 90s, when they thought that programming was getting a little more stale and like sanitized again. So they sort of switched it up again in the late 90s. And then around 2000, we started to see the big mergers of all these companies, where Rogers Telecommunications and Bell Telecommunications and Shaw started buying up pretty much every channel, because they had a conservative government that was allowing it. There's still people challenging that, saying, hey, you've basically created an oligarchy of 3 companies that run every media company in Canada. City was one of the last to hold out, and Chum Media. I should mention that City and Chum had merged, Chum being at the time, the most important radio station in Canada, English-speaking Canada, I should say. You know how you guys have like the top 40 radio and you have Billboard and everything? There was a point in the 60s and 70s and even into some of the early 80s where we didn't have like a national independent top 40 radio. It was the Chum charts. Whatever Chum was playing was the number 1 selling hit in Canada.
Okay.
and they merged with City to become the Chum City, and there was the Chum City building and Chum Communications. So they were all one. And then Bell came in and did a hostile takeover, and for years they were trying to push away from it, but they eventually came in, took it over, swept him out of power, out of programming power in 2000. I think it was 3, and immediately all the ratings dropped for all their channels, and pretty much since then, everything that was City owned or related to anything that he had created is now a syndication house where they just pump out American television shows, and we'll have a couple Canadian talk shows because that fits their Canadian content laws by having Canadians on there talking about what's just aired, and that apparently counts as Canadian content. But there was a point where every channel that he was in charge of was producing new Canadian shows like dramas, comedies, game shows, important talk shows. He was very key in helping form the Canadian identity, and being the kid of a Jewish immigrants that escaped the USSR. He had a pretty profound effect on shaping what we saw and heard about basically a lot of what happened in the Eastern Bloc and Holocaust and everything involved there. Like he was big into charities and running programs like that. He's probably the most, like I said, important media personality in Canada for that. He still runs some radio stations that are independent, but it's all basically based on stuff for the boomers, like the 60 to 70 plus category now. And when he goes, it'll be a pretty big blow to like the media landscape as a whole, because he's 79 now. So that I had to give as the background, because that his personality and that station, that City TV, is the basis for Videodrome. And it's quite obvious to anybody in Canada watching it. Like, it's in the movie.
Even one of the guys is named Moses.
Yes, and the James Woods character works for Civic TV, a channel that when it starts out, he's trying to procure Japanese pornos to air on television, and he is taking the TDC down to the station, and the building is made up to look like the Chum City building. So, like, it's quite clear that's what it was, and I had to give that background because that, for the Canadian audience, is why the movie is so important, because it was directly related to conversations that the government and the public were having about Moses Neimer and City TV being obscene and perhaps corrupting the youth and corrupting the minds. And where was this going to make a generation of deviants and people that are just horrendous people that no longer have any decency in their lives? And bam, Cronenberg went, let's make a movie about that.
See, it seems so weird to me because it sounds like, the real life guy, he's a pretty positive influence on.
Oh yeah.
But
no, that's not
Videodrome, the guy's a piece of shit.
Because that's not how he was looked at by the established old time British conservative Canadian media and government of the 70s. He was viewed as this radical leftist Marxist crazy guy. And then it turns out he changed the entire public perception and dynamic to the point where almost 2 to 3 generations of people thought the way he did, because he was so prolific in changing the media landscape of what we consumed.
Okay.
You could almost argue that the entire left-leaning mentality of Gen X and millennials in Canada come from programming he created either in movies, television, or radio. And there's a clear delineation of people that were older than that. The younger boomers, like my parents, grew up with him too, so they all liked it. But like, if you go to anybody that is like now in their 70s or older, like his contemporaries, thought he was crazy, and that he was going to destroy, a pure Christian loving, country Canadian, and he kind of did. he kind of opened the doors. I don't know if there was anybody in the States that was like that prolific. Maybe it's because we have 10% of the population of the States that a single person could be that influential on the public mass.
I can't think of anyone that would be an equivalent here.
And I'm not trying to like just be like, oh God, he's a god, we love him. No, it's just that if you look at his history, it was that profoundly important to the way. There were other people obviously that did that over time, but this is the guy that got the ball rolling and really pushed it and challenged the mindset. So that's why that film is important. And Cronenberg, being the age he is, he's maybe saw a lot of himself in him, in how he was being perceived as corrupting minds of people from his films, and Moses Neimer was doing it on television. And I guess if they had even taken it maybe as, like, well, what is Moses going to say? It's clearly about him. Well, one of the first television channels to show the movie uncut was CityTV. So they show Videodrome, almost like uncensored in one of their programming blocks. And it's like, is that like Inception, or is there multi levels of this? It's like, there's the channel that the movie is about, showing the movie, proving the point of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that out of the way, the movie gets weird.
Yeah, it's fucking strange. And for a while, it seems to meander. But once it kind of narrows in and Max starts asking the question, well, what is Videodrome? And he works with a technician named Harlan, who I fucking love. That actor's a wonderful performance. Like, that's just a great character. Things start to take a decidedly
you
weird
like him
turn.
because he's a satellite pirate like you were in the 90s.
Shut up. yeah, I love it. And he also calls Max Patron. And because we just finished playing Far Cry 6 about a week ago, like, obviously I'm still hearing a lot of that Latin kind of influence, and I just thought that was kind of quirky and funny. But no, this movie gets fucking weird. But it's genuinely entertaining. Like, I was enthralled with this, and the more I started watching it, like, after the movie was over, I actually had to seek out YouTube essays. I'm like, what the fuck did I just watch? And then I started really thinking about it. This is so relevant today. It is fucking freakishly terrifying. Like, Cronenberg really did see the future, because you think about what is Videodrome, what is Live Leak, what is 4chan, what is 8chan, what is Reddit. That's fucking scary, man, because there are people who seek out very disturbing things. You think about what's on the dark web. You look at the idea of self, where they talk about how life is television and television is life. That's the internet now. I mean, half the personas we project out on Twitter and social media, we present a different version of ourselves than who we actually are.
Well, yeah. Michael, you remember that the famous line from Marshall McLuhan?
Yep.
His whole speech, and then the ending with "the medium is the message."
Yep. I actually grew up down the street from his son.
Oh, okay. That's the medium is the message term, like that whole idea that it's not about, and we could get deeper into it, but it's not about the news itself. It's how it's the delivery method presented. Of it. Yeah, is the message itself for a new generation, and that's the mentality I can see going into this. Is like the whole idea of this film is it's not the programming itself. It's not that. It's that we keep you here, and if everybody keeps watching television and their condition, it's got a little bit of almost like 1984, almost like Fahrenheit thoughts
Orwell.
Behind it.
It's very Orwellian in some ways.
Yeah, and that people don't even realize that by watching television and it's showing you what you want to see, and maybe there's some like conspiracy theory stuff like, oh, there's subliminal messages in here, yada yada, but what it's about is that eventually the whole paradigm of the way you think will change, and if that changes, what is your reality? Your reality is what we tell you, and you can actually see that, like you said, Michael. Nowadays, you can see that with the youngest generation of kids born post 2005, even, where their reality is told to them through the tablet, and you even started to see it a little bit, even kids born in the late 90s, early 2000s, where I didn't think this was a thing until I heard it from my brother and people younger than him. That, like, they don't watch old movies or TV. Why? Well, it's old and there's too much other things to see. So they're actually growing up in a world where there's more information available to them than ever before at the touch of a button for free, but they don't focus on it because they don't need to.
Yeah, it makes a disconnect between groups of people easier to occur.
Yeah, like it was amazing to me to find out, like, there's a lot of things that maybe we would take for granted history wise that they don't know about, and it's like, why don't you know it? Well, there's too much information to take in, so they fixate on specific things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I've had firsthand experience with that with foster kids that we've had that are in their teens, that they just don't have any connection to a piece of history or a piece of media that seemingly is important culturally, like Citizen Kane, let's say.
Yeah.
What the hell's that? It's arguably one of the most important films ever made, and
or even so simple as like the Berlin Wall falling.
Yeah.
Like, even though I was a little kid when that happened, even kids in the mid to late 90s, they grew up, and not only did you learn about it, you learned why it was important. And yes, kids now, they either have no idea what it is, or they have no concept of time. They don't understand, how, like, 20 years ago to them may as well be 100 years ago.
When I was watching the HBO series Chernobyl, the kid that we had in the house at the time had absolutely no idea that was a real thing. That they were just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
All these people died. And, 1986, I remember it. I was terrified, but
like, even growing up, like, I'm born in 87, but like 95 in 96, I'm like 8-9 years old. That was a term I had heard of, and we knew, and you found out what it was. You asked people, you were told, you read a book, and it's almost like it's a little, I'm a little afraid that there's a disconnect between what they realize is real history and what is just a movie, or what is or isn't important. And it seems like whatever's happening on social media and TikTok and YouTube and videos, that's what's important, but not real world history.
Yeah, because it doesn't take any effort to actually watch a TikTok or watch, a silly video, but it takes effort to actually learn something.
And I mean, we had the internet in the late 90s in my household. We just got it. But like, to me, I had a voracious appetite for, like, before I discovered Wikipedia, that you would go to the net and you'd be like, I want to learn about this. And just the idea that you could pull up information whenever you want is great. But I can see as the internet widened to everybody, it got to the point where, again, it's too much. And you can sort of see that, like, the inklings of that here. Now, they didn't know about the internet or anything yet, but the idea that with the expansion into cable and the appetite for more and more and more, and not just more devious stuff, but anything that tantalizes the senses is what they're going for in Videodrome. It's got to, spark your interest and keep you hooked, because now there's so much competition. That's exactly what it's like today in the streaming landscape and television landscape. Television is slowly dying because with streaming, being able to click on anything at any moment on a multitude of different platforms, more things being produced than ever before. There's an infinite number of programming out there. You cannot watch. It used to be, even with, you had 3 channels, maybe some UHF channels, maybe when cable first started, you could potentially, if you had a VCR in the late 70s, early 80s, you could tape a couple different shows, and you could pretty much watch every new show that was out in a year.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It is impossible now. It's not possible simply because you've got maybe 100 new drama shows a year. There's not enough time in a day to watch it.
I'll go back and I'll give the example of the summer that Terminator 2 came out. I actually made a point of seeing every single film that got released that summer.
So like 91, right? So you saw pretty much everything.
And it didn't matter what it was, romance, anything. I was just going to watch every movie. Do you think you could do that for 3 months straight today?
God, no. Amazon Prime alone adds countless things.
And I mean, and we weren't, obviously, in 91, the direct-to-video market was strong too, but if we're just counting theatrical releases, except if you take out the pandemic year, if you take out the last 16 months because so few things were coming out, I would say, this year you probably could have, but if you go to 2019 or 2018, it's impossible. There were about 5 or 6 movies a week.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I felt overwhelmed trying that experiment myself even then.
Yeah,
but it worked. So I mean, with Videodrome, I actually really liked the kind of behind the scenes ideas and message it's trying to go for. I really like that. I thought the other thing that really stood out to me was Debbie Harry. Debbie Harry is fantastic.
Good Lord, is she a good actress? And oh my, was she good looking back then? And
Which one was she? She was the redhead, right, Nikki?
She's the Debbie Harry from
Blondie.
Yeah, the
Oh!
most she was like the most famous rock star in the world at the time.
She's the one where they have that crazy.
You're unfamiliar with
needle
Blondie?
thing.
I've only heard the music. I couldn't. If you showed me the band,
oh, okay. I guess you weren't a music video fan.
No, because I actually haven't watched a lot of 1980s music videos unless they're metal or rap. I actually don't know a lot of the pop culture ones.
Look for the video for Blondie's Atomic. Okay. Like
Atomic or even Heart of Glass, or actually, you know what? You should watch, Mike, that you'll dig. You would like Rapture.
Okay.
Because that's one of the first music videos. I think it was one of the first #1 hits that had rap in it, because she rapped in it.
Yeah.
And she became an actress later on in her career, and has come back and forth to doing. I think they had a reunion tour a little while ago.
But she's fantastic. She's a fantastic actress in this, and she actually has a very good screen presence.
She's the radio person, Mike, in the radio personality.
Okay.
But
not the one that he has sex with, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the ear piercing.
Yeah,
like licking the blood off the needle thing. Oh my god.
Yeah, that was like, what the fuck?
See, that's where the movie falls apart for me, though.
It gets much better later on, if not
it's too
straight up
disturbing. I felt dirty watching it. Like,
I think that's the point, right?
Well, I mean, if that's the point, like, I don't want to come away from a movie thinking about how disgusting I feel watching it. I want to think about, like, boy, that made me think about certain things in a different way. Like, this
that's
behind-the-scenes philosophy. But
that's kind of what I wanted from this, not to feel disgust. And what I mean by that is, as a filmmaker, as an artist, as a creative driving force, he achieved exactly what he wanted to set out to do. And there aren't many pieces of art and cinema that I can think of that evoke that emotion. I mean, I can name countless movies where I felt exhilaration, I felt thrills, I felt scared, I even felt in love and enraptured in a moment. But of moments of true disgust, those are exceedingly rare.
That might be because you and I, Michael, have watched so many things that we're maybe more desensitized.
We've seen some horrible things together, and I've seen some horrible things with my own eyes. And you're right, it's a desensitization. So, I mean, I
guess I'm on the other end of the scale.
Well,
there's so many things that just make me feel ill.
Well, you've also gone through a lot of stuff which we're not going to mention here on the show, Aaron.
That's the thing. We all have our own different experiences that shape
our own trauma,
how we perceive these things. To me, this sort of stuff has never bothered me. Like, for me, watching like somebody break their arm, like I said in The Fly, is more disturbing than watching this. I can see why this movie would be triggering to a lot of people for a lot of different situations. We may as well do a quick overview of the plot.
Yes.
Initially, we're introduced to James Woods' character as he meets up with. Well, he watches a VHS or beta cassette tape. That's the one thing. Everything in here is beta cassette, which I love
because the betas are smaller,
and higher quality.
Higher quality. Also, the dominant format in Japan, which ties into this beginning scene. Also, Betacam masters being the standard for television at the time. This starts with his character popping in a cassette and watching a Japanese import erotic show, and it starts with I forget the name of it. Was it like Erotic Pleasures of the Flesh or some sort of title?
I think it was called like Samurai Dream, or it was something really generic.
Geisha Dream, Samurai, whatever. And it starts with a woman in full Japanese traditional garb, with Oriental, I'm saying in quotes, music playing. It sounds very corny and hokey, and she uncovers a giant phallic dildo and uses it. And he looks at it, meets up with the seedy Japanese television salesman in a motel room where there's like gross food everywhere. They said there's 13 episodes, but he only wants the last 2 because all he's going to show are the sex scenes to his audience. And when he goes and sits down at a board meeting at the Civic TV, I mean City TV, I mean Civic TV, all they're saying is it's too tame. It's not exciting enough. I don't want to see art. I want to see people fucking. It's basically what he's saying. And then it's this quest to try to find more edgy content. What can we get that will pull people in? And in the process, he comes across a pirated signal from the satellite, which they believe is coming from Singapore, but then he's told eventually
Malaysia.
Yeah,
Malaysia?
Because Malaysia.
Yeah, because he says, judging by the satellite delay, Harlan's like, if I had to guess, Patron, it's about 53 seconds, which would put this probably in Malaysia, and it's weird.
Yeah. So, and he turns on the screen and he sees like a really staticky image of a woman being sexually tortured in a dungeon, and he's like, "So what's the story? What's the plot?" And he's like, "There's no plot. It's just an hour of that every day." And he's like, "What?" So there's no story. And instead of putting 2 and 2 together that what he's watching is a snuff film, he's like, "Oh, this is fantastic. It's super low production. It only requires 3 people." It's like in his head, he's thinking like the businessman of, "Oh my God, it's so cheap to produce. Why aren't we making this? Or how cheap could it be for us to purchase?" And never once thinking about it. Then he meets with his I guess European film acquisition lady, and
she's wonderful, by the way.
Yeah, and she's like, "You don't want this," and he's okay. She goes, "It's real." He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "That's not." She goes, "They're snuff films," and he's like, "No, he won't believe it. He just can't believe that it's a real thing." But the more he watches it, the more he gets obsessed with it, and he meets Debbie Harry, who is a radio host for a like emotional support hotline show,
kind of like the old Dr. Ruth, but a little less bitchy, so to speak.
A little bit like something, like a radio show that doesn't exist anymore, sort of thing. You can't really make a show like that anymore for like call-in shows like that. And turns out that she's a deviant herself and is into pain for pleasure and yada yada yada. They watch the show together, and he starts to hallucinate, and he starts to see things like the V8 or the beta cassette pulsating like it's an organ, and it gets weirder and weirder. Eventually, he starts to have the ability to, at least in his mind, his body starts to morph, and like he gets a beta cassette vagina in his chest, for lack of a better term. And it's revealed that Videodrome is a program with subliminal messages that are made to alter the perception and reality of those that watch it by creating a tumor in their mind or in their head. And through some discovery of what's happening in it, the guy who invented Videodrome believes that it's not actually a tumor, that you're actually growing a new human organ that will alter the human reality that we perceive. Not that it's a hallucination, but that eventually your brain will manifest the things that you are seeing to become real somehow. And he finds out that the guy that invented it is dead. He was the first victim of Videodrome, and that there's an evil corporation that is going to use Videodrome to shape North American reality, starting with Canada, then going to the States, all under the guise of Europe and Asia is getting hard in their terms as far as militaristic, and we've become soft, so they're going to use it to mind control people into becoming the perfect soldiers and perfect clean Americans and clean Canadians with righteous indignation, blah blah yada. And the evil corporation is an optical glasses company. sunglasses and prescription glasses. I thought that was kind of funny. Then we have the moment where he gets reprogrammed by a new tape from Videodrome and is turned into an assassin to kill people by sticking the beta cassettes into his belly, in his mind's eye view of it, that programs him. And he eventually regains control, goes on a killing spree to kill Harlan and the owner of the glasses company. When he shoots the glasses company guy, his body mutates and explodes. And Debbie Harry had been taken and killed by Videodrome on one of their programs or something. It's still not explained whether or not they actually killed her or if it was all in his mind. And he sees her on the television set in the inside of a old abandoned, I guess, shipping boat. And she tells him that the only way to free himself is to kill himself, and his mind will live on within the Videodrome perception. So he sees himself kill himself on the television, which then explodes with a whole bunch of intestines flying out of it. And then we see the exact same scene, and he shoots himself, and that's the end of the movie.
But not before he says one final time,
yes,
long live the new flesh.
Yeah, death to Videodrome, long live the new flesh. And you're then left with the thought of, did any of this happen? Or did all of it happen, and is it real? And that's where a lot of people are going to check out partway through this movie. Believe me, it has some amazing visual effects that I can't deny. Like, must have been copied a year or two later for Nightmare on Elm Street.
There is the idea behind Videodrome is what intrigues me the most, because I'm a big fan of the Matrix and stuff like that, alternate realities, perceptions. And there's one line in the Matrix that Morpheus says to Neo, something along the lines of, what is reality but electrical impulses interpreted by your brain? So yeah. Videodrome, if it can reprogram your reality, how do you even know what you're seeing right now is real? Like, your reality is different from my reality. And it's such an interesting philosophical movie.
Yeah.
That's what took me by surprise. Like, I was expecting, like, I'd seen the shots of the tape in the chest and the pulsating and all that shit, and the TV trying to eat him. I seen all that, but without context, it doesn't make a lot of sense other than, oh, that looks neat. But when you look at the subtext of this movie, hell, if you cut out the gore or were to tone it down, this movie would still work.
And that's where you'll end up with the Existenz later on when we watch that. Picture this, but toned down.
Yeah, like, I was genuinely really impressed. And I'm with Aaron. The lead character in this is a scumbag. You don't want him to succeed. But as he gets consumed by Videodrome, you see the desperation. Like, it's no longer about, ooh, I want the most shocking thing on Civic TV ever. It's to, like, what the fuck is this? How do I get out of this?
Like, it's clear that the character was supposed to be a blend of Cronenberg himself and Moses Znaimer. Or the perception that they were being dragged across through the mud in mainstream media at the time. It's like, this is what you guys think of us? Well, we'll make a movie about that. And it has its moments again where it's like, what? But at the same time, you can see where they were coming from when it was being argued in the media at the time that city TV and then ultra-violent movies like this are going to, alter the perception of children, ruin their minds, and they'll never think the same again. And in a sense, yeah, but it didn't turn out like everybody turned into crazy psychopaths that can't perceive, reality from what is real and what is fake.
No, everybody seems to be completely undisgusted by David Cronenberg films.
And that's the thing. I think it depends on when you were, exposed to it. Also, many other factors. But I'll admit, this was sort of the height of his grossness stuff. And you might see a little bit later on, like, if we're not doing Naked Lunch, but that movie is weird because the book is weird. We're talking like sex with bug creatures and a typewriter that turns into a living organism, and it's I mean, it's got RoboCop in it. That's cool, but like that is not a movie that you like. Even watching it completely sober, it doesn't make any sense. So like that's why we're skipping that. And I would say that Existenz is the closest to this in terms of the
Tone?
the tone, but also it's less creepy. There are a couple moments in it, but it's not like this. This was the height. This and then The Fly being obviously the height of his body horror gross out stuff, because this movie, interestingly enough, he filmed 2 movies back to back and they came out the same year. It was this and The Dead Zone came out the exact same year, and they couldn't be more different in tone and style, right? So
yeah, I don't know. I still think that it's not really the grossness that turns me off of this film.
It's the
I
subject
mean,
matter.
there's parts of it that are just like really upsetting to me, for different reasons that we won't go into. But
yeah,
it's the fact that like there is not a single character that I feel a connection to, or I feel is actually a decent person that I want to root for.
I can name one, the Jamaican eye doctor. That
Yeah.
sees and says,
He seemed nice.
He seemed nice for the 30 seconds he's talking on camera.
Yeah, but I mean
that's about
like
it.
your main characters are just complete trash, and you want them to fail.
His secretary also, he is a womanizing, scummy character. One of the first things we were introduced with James Woods is not only is he like flirtatious with everybody, he goes into the office and the first thing
and
he
just
does,
randomly grabs a girl's ass.
grabs a girl's ass, winks at her, and just walks by, and like she just has to, and she's like, oh okay. It's like it's clear that he's hiring women for how they look in his office, and how he behaves is like, yeah, it's 70s office culture, but like it's so blatantly obvious that Cronenberg is doing his best to make him just an unlikable evil character.
Yeah, and that's what I wasn't brought into the movie. I didn't have any kind of investment in it because of that.
I also kind of liked the European film distributor, because she warns Max. She's like, stay away from this, Max. It's dangerous. Whatever it is, whatever this is in the end, you need to stay away from it as your friend. Promise me you will.
Yeah, this is snuff TV. You don't want this. Nobody wants this.
And he's like, I don't care. It sells anyway.
Yeah, so like that, and she's like supposed to be like almost like some sort of mystic character. She never really shows up again.
Well, she does as a corpse.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's Videodrome. It's again, from what we said way earlier on, it's a culturally significant film for all the background around it, much more so in Canada than like in the States. That's probably why it's a bigger deal up here. And then, like we said, we're skipping the other 2 because we talked about him earlier, and we jump into his last film of the 80s, which is Dead Ringers, which whether or not you end up liking the movie, again, this one's a technical marvel because they invented the multi-camera technique where they would superimpose one actor, like the same actor could play 2 roles on screen at the same time. There's a behind the scenes thing I saw. It might be on YouTube, but I remember having it on the DVD and the Blu-ray, where they showed where they could divide the screen up any way they wanted. Previously, when you do 2 actors on the same screen, they had to do the thing where they would superimpose both images or double expose them. So the camera had to stay perfectly still in a room and constantly be on, you film 2 things, one person on one side, one person on the other, and then they would just basically slap the 2 film negatives on top of each other. This was different in that they were able to cut the screen up any way they wanted. They could make a jagged line. In the days before like green screen, and green screen had been there for certain things, but it always had that halo effect and looked weird. This is the first time where they're able to move the camera dynamically around the screen and have one actor play 2 roles on the same screen. And that technology eventually was used for Forrest Gump and a few other films a couple years later. But this is the film that invented the technology for it. Interestingly enough, being a fairly low budget film. But this was a movie about twin gynecologists and their downfall. It's probably the best way to put it. Jeremy Irons, in his first role, he played in a few movies with Cronenberg, puts in a pretty strong performance, I'd say, considering he's playing 2 he plays twins, but with very differing personalities.
This is the best Jeremy Irons movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I agree. He was
Like-
fantastic in this.
Like, the movie itself, I don't really care for, but his performance was like, you're really good, dude. Like, and to think, this is a guy who would later go on to do Die Hard with a Vengeance. Okay, sure. And then Dungeons and Dragons in 2000, he's like, I am Profion. Ha, ta, 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 ta. It's so over the top. But here, it's so layered and nuanced. Like, I love him in this. I really do.
Yeah, no, he is arguably the best thing about this movie. I mean, the whole movie is gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's so well produced. It's so well shot.
Yeah, playing twins, Beverly and Elliot, I believe, or Ellie and Bev.
Yeah.
The movie starts, I don't think they say the date. It starts sometime
1954.
54? Okay,
Yeah.
they're kids. And it opens with one of the most awkwardly funny intros I've seen.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up.
Two brothers, and I mean, they're clearly have one more than the other, but have some form of severe social.
They don't understand the social cues.
They don't. Not just that. They don't understand really how people are. They understand things purely from a scientific level, and they're discussing sex and why. I think they're supposed to be like 8 years old.
Yeah, and they're talking about how fish reproduce.
Yeah, and they just walk up to a girl that they know from their street and say, "Would you like to have sex with us in our bathtub for science?"
And she's like, "You don't even know what that means." I'm telling my dad.
I know for a fact you don't know what fuck is. And walks away. I'm like, and I died laughing how stupid and weird that was. And then it flashes forward to the late 60s, I think 67, and they're university students. And the idea is their claim to fame is they invented a very useful gynecological tool that at first their professor makes fun of, but then turns out becomes the industry standard worldwide. So that they became, millionaires based on that. And one of the brothers is much more socially awkward than the other. One actually fits in quite well, but has sociopathic tendencies. And the other is a much more sensitive person, but understands the way people work even less and is more of the social recluse and does all of the research, while the other is more of the practicing surgeon. But we are introduced to the fact that because of their twin nature, they will flip into each other's lives at any given time. So when one has to go do a presentation for the scientific paper they did, he will send his brother, who's more socially adept, and he will pretend to be Beverly when he's not. And it turns into another thing where that brother who's more socially adept will pick up women and tag his brother in because he doesn't know how to pick up women, but he'll tag him in so he can go have sex with them.
Yeah, basically Bev gets what Elliot calls the boring ones, and Elliot keeps the ones that are a little more entertaining, in his words. And it's interesting because the brothers share experiences, but that's kind of what this core movie's about. It's the experiences that separate them but bring them together in a interesting way.
Yeah, and it starts, you're like, well, that's pretty creepy. And then you start realizing that they start sharing patients, and they won't inform their patients who they are. They just let their patients assume that they are who they'll wear each other's name tags. They'll that sort of thing. It becomes very creepy. It becomes a big ethical question of, well, it's not even a question. It's a major ethical dilemma of who they have. And Beverly starts to become more and more neurotic and starts to have these perceptions that all the women he is seeing at his practice are mutants of some kind. So he starts to invent these horrific looking tools that he uses to perform gynecological surgeries on mutated women. And it starts to become it's almost like there's a very severe amount of body dysmorphia within him, but not in the sense of like a gender dysmorphia. He just sees bodies as being wrong. He sees himself as being wrong and doesn't understand it, and doesn't understand why nobody else sees it. and it starts to drag down. They start hurting patients, and it starts to drag down Ellie in it as well, to the point where they're self-medicating, writing each other's prescriptions, and some disastrous things happen. And at the very end, like there's a love triangle involved, which spirals out of control, because the major issues with trust in this, obviously. And what ends up happening is they end up drinking and perform surgery on one another. One of them dies, and the other tries to go out and pretend to be the other brother. And that when that doesn't work, the very end of the movie is he kills himself, and they're both together on the ground. And there's this thought in their heads that they're not, without the other person, they're not a whole. That they're essentially one person, and that they were almost like, they feel like if they had been Siamese twins, like they should have been connected at the head or at the brain, and that when one dies, the other can't live without the other one because they don't know who they are.
They actually reference the real life Chinese Siamese twins, where I think one was named Ong and Chang. Or something.
Now we would call them obviously conjoined twins, but twins. Sorry, but at the time that's what it is. So there's a lot there. This movie is all about the betrayal of trust and their inability to understand how to deal in people in the social world, because they only understand each other. They don't understand how people work.
Yeah, like it's like Bev in some ways is likable for most of this, but then when he develops the drug problem, less likable, because once
and you can see he's not a psychopath. He's a sociopath.
Yeah, like he doesn't feel like, he's not Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, but there's something very clearly wrong with him. That's something that almost could be treated with psychotherapy, but there's a moment. Sorry.
It's almost like each one of them only has certain traits that a whole human would have.
Yes, like certain aspects are stronger in the other.
Beverly has
empathy.
Has the empathy and the emotional feeling, but doesn't know how to process it, and it internalizes everything. And Ellie has all the other features, has the
confidence,
and has the dominating features of humanity, and Beverly has the sensitive nature of humanity, and together they can sort of function as a functional human, but because of that, neither of them has the parts required to function properly. Mm-hmm. And when obviously, like I said, when one goes, the other one realizes they can't deal.
Yeah,
it's interesting, crazy, but again, ultimately, it's not an easy movie to watch.
It's worth it to watch for Jeremy Irons alone. Like it's worth watching for that. If you ignore the story, it's worth it for him alone, but it does raise some interesting questions. It's weird. The body horror in the surgical tools, it's very unnecessary and superfluous, I feel. But the examination of two separate people being essentially a whole, but in two separate bodies, one thing that I loved is, again, referring back to them talking about the conjoined twins and how one of them died of shock and fear because the other one had passed away from a stroke. That was kind of, because you could hear in Iron's performance just fear, and he's trying to get through to his brother. And I don't know, there's something very moving about the performance. I mean, these are terrible people. Could they be helped? Again, with psychotherapy? Maybe. Probably not. They're probably too far gone for that. But there's something beautiful in how much they love each other, but it's also disturbing in how much they love each other.
Well, and what they wanted to do, like clearly, like, they make the mention later on, they're like, oh, we always wanted to move into pure research. They were doctors that should have never, ever. Well, first of all,
scalpel.
The problem is they were untrustworthy because of the nature of how they were fluid in each other's lives. But you could see that there was a general want, at the very least from Beverly, to want to actually help mankind by making tools and doing research into anatomy and things, and really further the medical sciences. It's just it doesn't work out. Interestingly enough, there were other twins in this film. You remember from Crossing Jordan, Jill Hennessy?
Yeah, the two girls who look like her.
Well, that's it's her in real life. She has a twin, and so
Really?
this was her film debut.
Wow.
Yeah, she's from Waterloo, like from
Holy
KW.
shit! Wow.
But yeah, so she had her film debut here. This is well before she was on Crossing Jordan or other TV shows. And her sister, I forgot about that. And Genevieve Bujold is good as the love interest of both, but mostly
As Claire.
Beverly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another note, Stephen Lack, the lead who played Vale in Scanners, is in this too.
I thought that was him, but I wasn't sure.
But yeah, so
also wonderful score by Howard Shore. I'd like to point that out.
Yeah, and again, other than Iron's performance, it's a breakthrough performance for him. But yeah, I can hear Aaron's been pretty quiet because this is. Yep. I almost feel like these characters are worse than James Woods' character.
Yeah, see, I love Jeremy Irons in this. The performance is what I mean. You should watch this movie for his performance. Whether just put the film on mute to me, but watch his performance. He is fantastic in this, portraying two very different characters that look exactly the same. And I guess it came down to how he stood. I read that it was about one character he played on his heels and one character he played on leaning forward on his toes to give a very different energy to them. And I thought that's actually really interesting. But I watched this entire movie and I just felt depressed afterwards.
It's sad.
It's a very sad movie. I didn't. The body horror stuff wasn't that weird or awful, I guess, compared to Videodrome.
Yeah, this was much more about body dysmorphia than it was about. It was about this their own mentality and the than it was actual manifestations or on screen.
The main characters. You're right. The main characters are just awful people. Even if one is more human than the other, if you know what I mean, has some sort of morals, they generally don't. They're just both terrible people. Yeah, I mean, overall, I did not like the movie. It made me feel sad.
Yeah, the tagline for the movie was 2 bodies, 2 minds, 1 soul.
Now, did you guys know Amazon Prime has picked this up as a television show?
Oh man!
Really?
Yeah. Yes, it's currently filming in New York with Raquel Wise, who you may remember from The Mummy and was also most recently in Black Widow, if I remember right. I was like, okay, that's a pretty weird idea for a movie, but
are they flipping it and she's playing twins?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure because I read this on the wiki and I looked at some YouTube videos last night, but I didn't have the volume on. But I was like, that's an interesting idea. I mean, if any of Cronenberg's movies would work as a TV series, I would have picked Scanners, which they arguably did. And I could make Videodrome work as a mini series if I was given 10 episodes to play with.
Videodrome
Dead Ringer is such a weird idea, such a weird pick.
Yeah. Videodrome is like his version of John Carpenter's They Live.
Yeah.
In the tone and the style. Like this I would not picture to be remade as a TV show.
Yeah, I know. Like it's such a weird
pick.
Does
seem weird. It does seem weird.
And this, like I said, he worked with Jeremy Irons one more time in the
M Butterfly, was it?
Yeah, M Butterfly, which is we're not going to cover it, but you can watch it if you want to. And that is based on a true story of a diplomat that went to work overseas and fell in love with a woman. I'm going to say in quotes that was actually a male spy actor, and he didn't have. It was like a 20-year relationship where they never had any sex or physical manifestation of their love, but he had a romance that lasted that long in real life and didn't know that he was feeding information to a spy. And it was based on a play that's based on the true story that happened. I've never actually seen the movie, but I know it's not. We're not covering it because it's not a thriller or a horror, right? So we're not really going to cover that. But I heard that it was another one where it was fantastic performances, especially from Irons, and I think John Lone plays the love interest. But that it got really shot down in the States at the time because they're like, we're not going to show a gay relationship in a mainstream movie in 1993. And it did really well in Europe and Canada and tanked in the States and tanked in Asia. Sort of a thing where I think it was just outside of it wasn't the right time, I guess, for those markets, or they weren't ready for it. But I know Jeremy Irons was always proud of that role and proud of this for, he said, the challenge it took to do this movie. And I think like right after this is he did like one or two other American features, and then he's Scar in The Lion King. So
Crazy.
This I think is where a lot of people were introduced to Jeremy Irons in a big way. Because think about playing the twin role, playing a dual role in a movie was still a novelty at the time. Because it was not easy. It was not easy to do.
The only time I can think of that would have come after this is in Star Trek: The Next Generation with Data and Lore. Those scenes seem remarkably similar to some of this.
And that would have been what this is. When did Lore get introduced? What was it?
I don't know, Aaron. You're there. You're a
Star
Star Trek guy.
Season
Lore,
2.
I want to say, is in
season 3 or 4.
3. I want to say season 3, but I probably just...
So that would be 89, 90. So that would have been a year or two after this.
Yeah. I mean, there's some duplication scenes in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and that's 89.
Yeah. So that's a year after this too.
But it's not to the extent as this.
Yeah, it's pretty prolific, and again, if it's this film again is important because of Jeremy Irons' performance, and because again of the background tech that was invented for this that ended up being used heavily in pretty much every Hollywood picture until CG became good enough to make people superimposed look good. Now it's like it's probably a joke. Like it'd be like, really? It was so hard to film this. It's like, yeah, man. You tried doing it without making it look like I kept looking at this and I could not see like a halo effect. I couldn't they looked like they were in the same room at the same exact time. Like it was
very well done.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's gonna do it, I guess, for the '80s films. As you can see, like it hit very much like the '70s, hit or miss, right? Like it wasn't. You're either going to really like his films or you're really not going to like them.
This was the decade of his stuff. I think I liked everything. There wasn't anything that really said "fuck you." Now, Dead Ringers was a little boring to me, but I liked the performance. But everything else I thought was fucking great. Scanners is fucking fantastic. Videodrome I liked a lot more than I thought I would.
You're a big body horror fan. You love the Italian giallo. Like you like the nasty horror films.
Yeah, like I like practical effects. I like gore, and if you're gonna make it look gory, it better have a little bit of viscous to it, right?
And I think Aaron, you're a little more of the less is more.
Yeah, I'm for sure. I always think that the best horror films are the ones where you don't really see anything, where it's all in your head rather than on the screen. But that takes really competent filmmaking and lighting, cinematography, writing, et cetera, et cetera. It takes a lot of effort to make that work well. So it's much easier to just throw blood on the screen and hope people are disgusted.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see a transition as we go into the 90s. Like I said, we're skipping Naked Lunch because I don't understand that movie. I don't think anybody understands that movie. Mike, you can watch it if you want, but we're not going to talk about it because it's too weird.
I don't got time for that shit.
Exactly. And Butterfly came after that, and we're not going to do that one, so we're skipping that. And then we're going to do Crash, which I've never seen, but I heard was infamous in the States for getting an NC-17 rating.
Oh, I've seen it, which is crazy. Yeah.
So we're going to watch Crash. I know it's James Spader and is it Holly Hunter and some other people, Elias Koteas, and a few other people that it's got faces you'll recognize. And I think when we jump to that, we're going to see another big jump in visual quality to being like, oh wow, we're now clearly in the 90s. We're clearly in the film age that we're more probably comfortable with. And then after that was the film Existenz or Existenz, and that had the unfortunate reality of coming out within a week or two of The Matrix while dealing with similar concepts. I don't know which came first necessarily. We'll have to look that up before we watch, but that was the film that I was introduced to Cronenberg with when it first came out. And then we're doing those two movies, and we're doing two movies from the 2000s because there weren't as many movies that he did in the 90s to begin with, because he's starring in more movies and producing and stuff instead. And then early 2000s, he did a movie called Spider, which has Ray Fiennes, and I've never actually seen it, but I know it's a mystery thriller about a man with amnesia. But we're going to skip that one. We can probably come back to it at another time, because we're going to jump into his next film, which was A History of Violence, which I believe was eventually his biggest theatrical hit. And that is based on a graphic novel that he adapted. And we're going to finish off with Eastern Promises, which was his biggest budgeted picture that he ever produced. I think it had a $50 or $60 million budget. And after that, we're not going to do any more because we're going to be pretty darn close to Halloween and we've got other programming to come up. But the other films he did after that were, he did, I think, 3 or 4 films. One was worth watching. I'll say that right now because it's an interesting period piece. And that is A Dangerous Method, which is about Carl Jung and Freud arguing back and forth over how to treat people. And it's another one with Viggo Mortensen and Michael Fassbender's in that, and Keira Knightley. And then after that, he did Cosmopolis, which makes no sense. It's, again, based on a weird book that I'm like, what? And it's, again, a thriller, not really a horror film, so we're not covering that. And his final film was Maps to the Stars, or Map of the Stars, which has Julianne Moore and John Cusack and a bunch of other people in it. It was a film based on a book, and it was one of those things where all the actors wanted to work with him because they thought he was retiring, so they had a bunch of people that showed up just to be in the movie. And it's a weird mystery movie, and it's okay, but not great. And that was his final film that he had made until it was announced this year that he was making a new movie with Viggo Mortensen. So that's why we're picking 2 from the 90s, 2 from the 2000s, and that would be enough to give you the largest sample you're going to get of Cronenberg, and the rest sort of you can fill in the gaps if you want to. And I'm going to assume that after that, we're going to return to regular programming where we pick a bunch of random movies.
Actually,
Awesome.
I would like to propose something here on the show, just because I've got a real reason to watch these, and I don't really know why. I want to talk about the Highlander franchise. Can we do that?
Oh, yeah, because I bet you I have hot takes that most people would disagree with on the Highlander movies.
Unless it's that you like the source, I don't think it's going to be surprising anybody.
I actually, believe it or not, I like the second film more than the first.
It's going to be good.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, that's my hot take, and people are going to scream at me.
So we'll do that. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. That'll be fun.
All right, yeah. So look for that coming up later on. This should be coming out fairly shortly. A couple of programming notices. We are aiming still to record our session 0 of Twig Stargate. I've been working with the team, and we're going to try and have those out over the holidays. You have fresh content every week. We're going to try and record a bunch leading up to it and just try and get all that done and out of the way. I am taking next week off outside of reviews because it's my birthday week, and I've just got a bunch of government stuff that I have to deal with and work with. And me and Alex are going to be recording our commentary for Halloween 3. That'll be coming up sometime next week, as we're currently kind of looking at things. And we have more Earth versus Soup. We're going to be doing more Star Trek now that I think Lower Decks is getting close to done, if not done already.
I think it's done as of yesterday.
Yeah, we just got to watch that and talk about it.
Yep, Discovery is premiering next month at some point. We'll be following that.
Isn't Prodigy as well?
Yep, Prodigy comes out at the end of the month, so we'll be talking about that. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, we've just got a lot of really good stuff coming up before the end of the year. As always, stay tuned. Holiday gift guide stuff is coming in a big way right now. As you saw my post on Instagram and Twitter, Hasbro has rained upon the Autobot matrix of leadership on me, so yikes. Got a lot of stuff. Also, I've been talking with Skyblaze of Nerds of the Third Power. We are going to be doing our Halloween episode of Nerds of the Third B-Sides. We're going to be talking about our experiences with horror RPGs, such as Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf Hunter, etc. And just some fun stuff in there. Going to be a lot of cool things to talk about. So anyway, guys, for This Week in Geek's Loose Cannon, starting in the city of Kitchener,
Alex.
going to the wonderful world of Lansing, Michigan,
Aaron Pollyea.
and I have been your host, Mike the Birdman, saying, long live the new flesh.
Are either one of these any good? Sir,
What?
are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Quick, change the channel.
You're wasting your life making shit! Nobody cares! These movies are terrible!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
Lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.